My mother once told me, "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, sweetheart. And that's okay. Someone has to support the stars." She said it gently, over coffee, like she was doing me a kindness. I was 19, freshly commissioned, my uniform still stiff with pride. She didn't mean to hurt me, at least, I don't think she did. But that sentence split me in half. It became the quiet soundtrack of my life. Every holiday, every visit home, I heard it echo in how they doted on my sister, the real success story. They never outright said I was a failure, but silence is louder than words. When my sister got promoted, they posted about it like it was the second coming. When I returned from deployment, they didn't even meet me at the airport. "You're always so busy," my dad said, as if I'd missed a dentist appointment, not spent 7 months running black ops across borders no one dares name. At Thanksgiving, my own seat was handed to a neighbor's son because he just got accepted to law school, and that's a big deal. I ate standing up by the sink, my medals still packed in a box in the garage. That night, I told myself I was done. I wouldn't chase their approval anymore. I had survived enemy fire. I didn't need to survive my own family's indifference. Then, last month, I sat in the back of a command briefing, there to observe, nothing more. The room buzzed with names and ranks, titles that never seemed to fit right on me. Until the door opened. A commander walked in, eyes scanning, and stopped. Right on me. He squared his shoulders, stood straighter, and said, "Ma'am, you're the general?" And suddenly, the room fell silent. Not for her, not for my sister, for me. That moment wasn't sweet, it was sharp. It was years of being unseen cracking open in a single breath, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't embarrassed to take up space. My name is Colleen Walsh. I've led men into fire, held the hands of soldiers dying in sand, and made decisions that still keep me awake. But the hardest thing I've ever done was survive being invisible in my own home. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Please just drop a listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It means more than you think. Sometimes, knowing someone is out there makes it easier to tell the truth out loud. And if my story reaches you, if it makes you feel less alone, please consider subscribing. It helps this truth go further. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Colleen Walsh, oldest daughter of the Walsh family, 3 generations deep in uniform, discipline, and unspoken expectations. We were practically raised on base protocol. At Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the military wasn't just a career, it was our family religion. My father, Roy Walsh, retired as a colonel from the Air Force. My mother, Marilyn, served as a combat medic and wore her silence like another set of medals. My younger brother's now a major, and Erica, my baby sister, is about to be pinned as a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And me? I'm the one they don't talk about. To the family, I'm the quitter, the one who walked away from West Point after year 1. They said I couldn't handle the discipline, the structure, said I didn't have what it took. But none of them knew I didn't leave. I was pulled, handpicked for a covert intelligence program so classified it didn't officially exist. No graduation, no ceremony, no framed photo on the wall. Just a series of one-way tickets to places no tourist ever should go. For the last 20 years, I haven't been absent from their lives. I've just been erased. I sent birthday flowers to Mom, a Christmas card to Dad with a fake address stamped in Maryland. I watched from afar as Erica climbed the ranks, as my brother got married on a base chapel lawn, as their lives unfolded in neat, public chapters. I wasn't in the picture, literally. A cousin once told me there was a family photo where I'd been cropped out to balance the frame. They said I quit because I wasn't tough enough. What they didn't know, what I couldn't tell them, was that I spent 6 months buried in operations in Damascus, that I spent 4 days hiding inside the walls of a hostage compound in Libya, coordinating a rescue that saved 30 civilians, that in the mission dubbed Candle Strike, I lost 3 of my men and a piece of myself I still haven't found again. And still, I came back. Just never home. You don't tell those stories in this family unless they come with medals and press coverage. I had neither. Just scars. Most of them invisible. Then came the call. It was early fall. Crisp air, gold leaves clinging to the end of summer. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice was brisk, not unkind but cold, like a nurse reading you a chart, not speaking to her daughter. Erica's getting promoted. You should come. Just don't wear anything weird. Don't make her look bad. No, how are you? No, we'd love to see you. Just don't embarrass us. I didn't argue. I said, I'll be there. Not because I expected a red carpet, not because I thought they'd welcome me with open arms. I was going back for one reason, to see if, for once, they could look at me and see the woman behind the shadow. To see if, in the right light, they'd realize they'd misjudged me all these years. That night, I stood in front of my closet. In the back was my old dress uniform, crisp, untouched, folded as if still waiting for a ceremony that never happened. I put it into my suitcase. Next to it, I hung a soft, neutral blouse and slacks, clothes that wouldn't draw attention, that wouldn't scream for validation. Just quiet fabric in quiet tones. In the mirror, my face stared back at me. Sharp eyes, lines around the mouth from too many sunrises in deserts. A face no longer young, but not old either. Just settled. No rank, no applause, no resentment either. Almost time, I whispered to the glass. I didn't know if I meant time to forgive or time to let the silence finally speak for itself. I arrived at Fort Campbell right on time. No warm welcome, no one waiting out front, not even a nod from the MP at the gate. The VIP parking lot was already full, lined with Lexus SUVs and government-issued sedans. I parked by the logistics unit's fence, where the gravel crunched under my boots like it remembered who I was, even if no one else did. The house hadn't changed much. Same beige paint, same weathered porch swing, same flag swaying with ceremonial pride. I opened the door and stepped into the same old air that smelled like lemon cleaner and old paperbacks. My mother stood in the dining room, placing printed name cards along the table. Without looking up, she said, "Go change your shirt. You and Erica will sit next to each other, but please don't interrupt her speech tomorrow." No hello, no hug, no comment on the fact I'd driven 10 hours to be here, just instructions, like always. My father greeted me the way officers greet each other when one's about to retire early. A firm pat on the back, a nod of recognition, something like respect, but stripped of familiarity. "Good you made it," he said, eyes already sliding past me to the room behind. Erica made her entrance like a debutante in dress blues. Her uniform was impeccable, bars polished to perfection, ribbons laid out like she'd won a war alone. She swept across the room, kissing hands and charming friends. When she finally noticed me, she gestured toward me with a manicured hand. "This is my sister. She used to be in the military for a bit. Now she's working in admin, I think." There was laughter. Light, polite, the kind that cuts deeper because no one thinks it's cruel. A cousin leaned in and asked in a half-whisper, "So what do you do now?" "VA office? Better than nothing, right?" "Better than nothing." I smiled. Not wide enough to show teeth, just enough to let it die there. I said nothing. There's a kind of dignity in silence, especially when your truth is classified. Inside the house, every wall was a shrine. Framed photographs of my siblings in uniform, graduation portraits, retirement ceremonies, award dinners. I scanned every frame. None of them held my face. The last one with me in it was from 2004, just after I left West Point. I remembered because I was cropped out later. They said it was to fit the new frame. A little niece, maybe 6 or 7, tugged on my hand. "Did you ever shoot a real gun?" she asked, eyes round and excited. I crouched to her level and smiled. "Sweetheart, I once wrote a plan that helped 30 soldiers make it home alive. That's better than any shot I've ever taken." She blinked, then ran off to play with a plastic tank. Dinner was a small pre-ceremony event, just family and a few close officers. Erica played the perfect host, all grace and calculation. At one point, someone complimented her on her poise. She beamed. "I've been practicing my speech," she said, sipping wine. Then, casually, "I want people to know that you don't have to walk away from something to realize you were wrong." The air in the room shifted. Just slightly. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The message was clear, and it had my name all over it. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The house buzzed with conversation and laughter behind me, but I wanted none of it. In the distance, a brass band was rehearsing, notes carried through the night like ghosts. I sat on the edge of the steps, watching the wind move through the trees. Tomorrow, I would sit quietly, let her have her moment. But truth has a voice of its own. And when it chooses to speak, no one, not even Erica, will be able to talk over it. The hall at Fort Campbell was a cathedral of command. High ceilings, brass light fixtures casting golden halos over rigid rows of folding chairs, all arranged by rank and title like a battlefield without bullets. I was seated in the third row from the back, wedged between a junior officer's fiancé and someone's overly perfumed aunt. Our row was labeled Family Unassigned, a bureaucratic way of saying, "You're here, but not really." Erica stood tall behind the podium at the front. The flag stood to her left, polished boots to her right. She had that look in her eyes, controlled fire, the kind you learn to perfect during war games and promotion boards. She spoke of loyalty, perseverance, and, my favorite, the importance of distancing oneself from those who once abandoned the sacred trust of the uniform. Every word calculated, every glance choreographed. The speech wasn't just for her superiors. It was aimed at ghosts, and one ghost in particular. When my name was mentioned, only in passing, as a family member in attendance, I noticed a few heads turn. A couple of officers exchanged hushed comments. One leaned toward another and whispered, "She looks familiar. Where have I seen her before?" I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes ahead, posture neutral, face unreadable. That's when he entered, General Hammond. He walked in with quiet weight, the kind that makes a room straighten its spine before it even realizes it. He scanned the audience briefly before his eyes locked on mine. A flash of recognition, then a brisk, direct march toward my seat. My heart didn't race, my palms didn't sweat, but the air around me shifted like the wind before a siren. The general came to a sharp stop beside me, heels clicking. He raised his hand in a textbook salute, sharp, proud, and public. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady and clear. "General Walsh, it's an honor to see you again." The room didn't just quiet, it froze. Erica's voice cracked mid-sentence. Her hand holding the note card trembled. The applause that had rippled after her earlier lines had vanished. She was no longer the gravitational pull in the room. I rose to return the salute. Not because I needed validation, but because I refused to let a man who once trusted me with lives stand alone in respect. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother drop her water glass. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. My father stood halfway up in reflex, then slowly sank back into his seat as if trying to disappear into the upholstery. A young officer behind me leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, not as quietly as he thought, "Is that her? The ghost commander from Dagger?" Erica struggled to gather herself. She tried to continue, voice brittle and eyes scanning the room for anchor points. But the energy had shifted. Eyes no longer hung on her every word. They were pinned to me, or worse, to the gap between what they thought they knew and what they now realized they didn't. The ceremony ended with polite applause, but the tension lingered in the air like smoke after a controlled burn. As the guests filed out and the officers mingled, Erica cornered me near the exit. No congratulations, no smile. "Why didn't you say something?" she hissed under her breath. "You let me stand up there, like a fool. Was that your plan?" I looked at her, not unkindly, but without yielding. "If you need the truth to shrink, you never stood tall to begin with." Her mouth tightened. She blinked twice, fast, like trying to hold something back. I walked past her before she could reply, the heels of my boots echoing against the polished floor. This time, as I walked away, I didn't feel the usual sting of invisible eyes mocking my back. Instead, I felt the weight of confusion behind me. An entire room unsure of the roles they'd been assigned to play, now realizing the cast list might have been wrong all along. After the ceremony, I didn't return to my family's house. I drove back to the base and let myself into the quiet, nondescript guest quarters they'd assigned me. Standard military beige walls, stiff bedding, and a lamp that hummed faintly when turned on. It was the kind of room built to host people briefly and forget them quickly. I dropped my keys onto the dresser, kicked off my shoes, and spotted something that didn't belong. A plain manila envelope resting squarely at the center of the desk. No name, no seal, no handwriting, just sitting there, like it had always been waiting for me. I opened it. Inside was a printed scan of an email, time-stamped 2 years ago. No sender listed, just a message forwarded from an encrypted relay server. The subject line, "Reckless Operation, Civilian Casualties." The body of the email contained allegations against a Colleen W., accusing her of commanding an unsanctioned mission that resulted in multiple civilian deaths. The message claimed that the details were buried in redacted reports and urged a fringe military blog to expose the rot within. It was a strange sensation reading your own death sentence drafted by someone else. The wording stopped me cold, because I recognized it, not just the operation it referenced, but the specific phrasing, nearly word for word from an after-action classified report I had once reviewed in a steel-lined bunker in Stuttgart. That report had only been seen by 3 people: myself, the lead analyst, and one junior officer with peripheral clearance, Erica. The dates lined up with a period when I had suddenly and inexplicably been flagged for a brief internal investigation. At the time, I was told it was an automated red flag system reviewing anomaly data. Routine. Nothing to worry about. The case had been dismissed within days. I had believed them. But someone had made sure the smoke lingered long after the fire had been put out. I took the envelope with me. I didn't bother changing. I found Erica at the after-party, still dressed in her uniform, surrounded by admirers, basking in the warm buzz of achievement. I waited until the crowd thinned, then caught her just as she stepped outside to take a call. I held up the scan. She glanced at it, her eyes catching on the page as if seeing it again for the first time. "Did you send this?" I asked, my voice even, not accusing, just asking for the truth. She stared at me for a long moment, and then, without blinking, she said, "Yes." I nodded slowly. "Why?" Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders dropped, like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. "Because you weren't supposed to win," she said. "You left. You didn't stay and build something. You don't get to come back and still be more important." I didn't move. I didn't speak. She pressed on, voice cracking. "They never stopped talking about you. Even when you were gone. Even when I did everything right." I thought, if I could just erase you from the picture, I could finally be seen. Silence fell between us, heavier than any accusation. I could see the child in her, the little sister who once trailed behind me, begging to be included, needing to feel special in a house where excellence was currency. "You do realize," I said finally quietly, "that leaking classified information is a criminal offense?" Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before narrowing again. She said nothing. I didn't push further. I turned and walked away. The cool night air hit me like a wave. I clutched the envelope in my hand, fingers trembling. Not from rage, but from the deep, quiet ache of understanding. Sometimes the blade in your back comes from the same hand that once helped you learn to walk. It was the sound of the base alarm that jolted me awake, not the usual morning bugle, but something sharper, urgent, piercing. A siren built not to wake you gently, but to force adrenaline into your blood. My phone lit up a moment later. Emergency protocol active. All high-clearance personnel were being summoned to the coordination center. I didn't have time to question why. Muscle memory took over. I was dressed and out the door in minutes. The halls of Fort Campbell were flooded with movement. Officers in various states of alert, some still pulling on boots, others already seated in front of flickering monitors. At the entrance of the main ops room, a grim-looking sergeant handed me a file, thin, but heavy in implication. A breach. A classified dossier connected to Operation Dagger, the mission I had led in the shadow corridors of Syria, had just been published to an encrypted forum on the dark web. The leak was recent, time-stamped within the last 3 hours. And worse, the forensic trace led back to an internal IP. Specifically, an inactive device once assigned to me, still embedded in the base system. It was like waking up in a life you didn't remember signing up for. Within half an hour, I was seated across from General Hammond and 2 officials from Military Intelligence Command. The room felt colder than it was. They didn't say I was under arrest, but I was under suspicion. They asked for full access to my communications from the past 6 months. I didn't argue. I gave them everything. Still, something didn't sit right. My mind circled back to the email, the one Erica had sent, the scan that had landed mysteriously on my desk. I hadn't dug deeper at the time, but now, with the full tools of the agency at my disposal, I retrieved the metadata and decrypted the sending path. What I found was startling. The anonymous sender had used an outdated link to an auto-backup server that once archived mission logs. That server had long been decommissioned, or so I thought. The link they used triggered a dormant process, one that unintentionally retrieved and attached a hidden file with top clearance intel. The file that had now surfaced online. A careless mistake, but not a random one. When I traced the origin device of the email, it pointed to a machine that had been logged into 2 days earlier using an active credential, Erica's. She had checked in late at the base for training prep, according to records. I remembered then. She'd mentioned leaving her laptop at the comm station overnight, unlocked, unattended. Her tone had been off, as if she'd expected me to say something about it. Now, her access was part of a forensic trail. I stared at the glowing screen. My sister, the little girl who once cried when I left for West Point. The woman who now, maybe out of desperation, was unraveling herself thread by thread. Before I could process more, a knock at my temporary quarters broke the storm inside my head. It was my father. He looked older than I remembered. Less stern, more human. We hadn't spoken alone in years. He didn't say hello. Just stood at the threshold and asked quietly, "Is it true? Did you leak it?" I met his eyes. There was no anger there, just fear. For me, for the family name. Maybe for everything he'd ever believed in about honor and service. I didn't flinch. "I don't need you to believe me," I said, "but I will prove the truth. Not for me, for the people still trusting this system with their lives." He nodded once, said nothing else, and walked away. The next morning, I requested permission to lead the internal investigation. It was unorthodox, but technically I was still on classified reserve duty and had the clearance to operate. More importantly, I had the motive no one else did, to expose the leak without burning down the institution that had shaped and nearly buried me. General Hammond listened without interrupting, then stood slowly, walked around the briefing table, and extended his hand. "General," he said, eyes steady, "the floor is yours." The room was so quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like static in my ears. I sat at the head of the Strategic Command briefing room, where I had once been denied entry by rank, now seated by necessity. Across from me were representatives from the Military Investigation Bureau and Base Security Command. Their faces were stony, their notebooks open but untouched. I laid out my hypothesis calmly. The breach wasn't intentional sabotage, it was a cascade. A sequence of reckless decisions and misjudged steps that began with an anonymous email. One sent not with the intention to betray, but to provoke. And in doing so, triggered a minefield. I presented metadata, system trails, and a digital breadcrumb that began with Erica's email and ended with a leaked classified file. They didn't dispute my logic, but they did one worse. General Hammond appointed an internal task force, comprised not of experts or outsiders, but my own family. I was to lead the team as primary analyst and field coordinator. My father, Colonel Roy Walsh, would manage campaign intel archives from past operations. He still had restricted access from his advisory post-retirement role. Erica was to trace internal system vulnerabilities and access points. And my mother, with her old training as a combat medic and a side specialty in biological trace evidence, was assigned to assist forensic recovery from the laptop left behind in the tech bay. It was like being thrown into a theater piece where every actor knew their role, but none wanted to share the stage. The first task force meeting was frigid. My father opened with a briefing, eyes glued to the screen rather than anyone in the room. He spoke in clipped tones like he was reading an obituary. Erica presented her segment next. Short, efficient, sterile. Her voice carried no inflection. She didn't look up once. Only my mother occasionally glanced between us, like she was watching her children turn into people she no longer recognized. But I wasn't there for warmth. I was there for results. And then the breakthrough came. While combing through an archival node tied to Erica's server scans, our security AI flagged a dormant Trojan embedded in a 2017 operations archive. It had never been activated, just tucked into the shell of a logistics file. The date stood out. 2017. That was the year I clashed heads with Derek Glade, a fellow strategist during a joint effort in Mosul. He'd wanted an aggressive sweep through civilian zones to eliminate hostile presence. I'd blocked it, demanding a phased containment strategy. It was the right call. But it made me a liability to him, and a symbol of what he considered bureaucratic weakness. Derek wasn't just a grudge holder. He had once held temporary encryption override for the campaign servers. If he'd planted the malware back then, it could have slept unnoticed until someone, like Erica, accidentally triggered it by accessing the wrong pathway. That's when my mother silently handed me a folder. "From Candlestrike," she said. "You left it behind when you shipped out." I read it. Back then, I thought you were hiding. Now I think you were just trying to survive. Quietly. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The words she gave me weren't an apology. They were something older, heavier. Recognition. I smiled, not because I was proud, but because something had shifted. Later that evening, our systems traced a login ping from a remote IP. It had tried, unsuccessfully, to scrub logs tied to the original breach. The location? A motel just outside Fort Campbell. A 3-day booking, paid in cash. The name used on the reservation, Derek Glade. It wasn't just about my sister anymore, or even my family. There was someone out there, clever, patient, and willing to use our fractures as his camouflage, a man hiding behind the chaos we'd made for ourselves. The raid on the decommissioned tech bunker felt like a storm front moving in, silent at first, then electric and sharp. Under emergency authorization, we surrounded the area with strategic precision. Derek had returned to the one place no one was monitoring, the old data relay room from a forgotten division, still wired into the secondary military net. He was halfway through uploading a compressed bundle of data when we breached. He didn't resist. He didn't even flinch. Just looked at me and said, "Took you long enough?" In interrogation, he laid it all out. Not proudly, but clearly. "I didn't want to take you down in public. Just wanted you out of the room. The intel leak was supposed to paint you as a liability. Once your clearance was stripped, no more NATO Council, no more front seat at strategic talks. You rose too fast. People stopped questioning you." His voice was bitter, not manic. A man who'd clung to his grudge until it soured into obsession. He'd built a strategy to exploit our family's divisions, banking on Erica's misstep to ignite the rest. I realized then, he didn't break us. He just watched us unravel, then planted his flag. When Erica read the transcript of his confession, she sat still, silent. She stared at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. After a few minutes, she spoke without looking at me. "I didn't know what I did would lead to this." I folded my arms. Sometimes we set fire to a dry field because we're jealous. We forget people sleep in that grass. Her face crumpled slightly, but she held it together. That was Erica. Pride armored her guilt. The next day, during the compilation of our final report, Erica submitted an addendum. She took full responsibility for initiating the chain of emails that ultimately enabled Derek's breach. Though she wasn't charged criminally, there was no intent to leak state secrets. She accepted a formal reprimand. It would cost her promotion eligibility for the next 5 years. She signed it without being asked. It didn't feel like a victory. At the concluding task force meeting, we sat across from each other once more, but this time it was different. Erica no longer avoided my gaze, and when our father stood up to give his closing remarks, he paused, then said, "I owe an apology to this entire team, especially to Colleen. I let medals and pride make me blind to what matters." It was the first time I'd ever heard him admit fault, let alone in a room full of brass. Erica didn't cry, neither did I, but when I met her eyes, I no longer saw the competitor who'd tried to erase me. I saw a woman learning how to stand on her own, without pushing anyone else down to do it. The morning of the regional strategy conference arrived with a fog that clung to the base like memory. I stood backstage, beneath the low hum of the projector and the subtle click of name badges against uniforms. The banner behind me read, "Redefining Shadow Warfare. Post-conflict intelligence in asymmetric environments." 62 commanders, 30 high-ranking advisors and nearly 100 observers had RSVP'd. Among the list of attendees was Lieutenant Colonel Erica Walsh, her name neatly listed under Field Officer Trainee. I had sent her the invitation myself. No explanation, no warning. Just one line typed in the notes section of the email. "It's time to learn what you thought I didn't know." The lights dimmed. I walked to the podium with no fanfare, no escort. Just a pointer in my hand and a lifetime of invisible scars on my back. I began with the simplest truth. Some missions never get a name. Some leaders never get a plaque. And some battles don't start at borders. They start where judgment replaces understanding. I saw heads tilt. Some familiar faces, officers who'd once echoed Erica's criticisms, looked at me with recalibrated respect. A few whispered among themselves. One leaned to another. "That's the woman who wrote the Eastern European Defense Doctrine in 16. Erica sat in the second row, her posture straight, pen poised, eyes locked on me. She didn't blink, she didn't fidget. And I knew. This time, she was here to listen. Midway through, I pivoted to an unreleased segment of the candle strike operation. For the first time in public record, I disclosed a classified decision I'd made alone in the field. I signed the override order that spared a hostile zone because 7 children were trapped inside. That signature almost ended my career. I would make that same decision again. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because truth doesn't need forgiveness. It only needs to be seen. Gasps rippled through the room, not from the drama, but from the clarity. War was no longer just a matter of territory. It was moral terrain. And leadership wasn't just about being right. It was about being ready to carry the weight of choice. As I closed the session, I turned to the stage's side microphone and said, "To conclude, I've asked Lieutenant Colonel Erica Walsh to share her reflections as a next-generation officer." Erica stood slowly. Her voice was firm, not flawless. Her eyes were wet, but her shoulders squared. "I grew up thinking accolades were the end goal, that who stood tallest got heard. But today, I learned that real honor is in knowing who you can learn from and having the courage to admit it." The room stood in ovation, not for me, but for something larger. For the idea that strength could wear quiet, that leadership could be taught by those we once envied, and that learning, even in uniform, never truly ends. In the back row, my mother sat with her hands in her lap. She didn't clap, but she nodded. For the first time, it felt like approval, not of my rank, but of my journey. As the crowd dispersed, an older general approached, his grip firm as he shook my hand. "I used to believe women had no place commanding battlefields," he said. I was wrong. I smiled, not out of victory, not out of pride. "Mistakes don't define us," I said, "but refusing to learn from them does. Today, you learned. That's what matters." A week after the conference, I sent 3 invitations, one to my father, Colonel Roy, one to my mother, Marilyn, and the last to Erica. The location was deliberate, the old family house on the edge of Fort Campbell. It was the same house where I'd once spent a single, restless night after graduating from West Point. This time, I arrived first. I set the table. I took the seat at the head, the one my father had always claimed. When they walked in, no one said a word. My mother held a dish in foil. Erica avoided eye contact. My father's expression was unreadable. Once we were seated, I didn't offer pleasantries. "I didn't call this dinner for apologies," I said. "I called it to speak the truth, my truth, for the first time, from my mouth." And so I began. I told them I hadn't quit the service. I'd been recruited into intelligence. I recounted the time I was detained for 3 days underground in Iraq after a failed extraction route was leaked by a counteragent. I described the time I gave the order to shell a supply depot to save an Australian recon team. 3 civilians were injured, none seriously, but I spent 8 months under inquiry and was eventually cleared. I told them I'd declined a medal for a classified Syrian relief mission. Accepting it would have risked diplomatic tensions, and I chose silence over glory. The room didn't breathe. My mother's eyes welled with tears. Erica stared at her plate. My father remained still, hands folded in front of him. Then he asked, so quietly I almost missed it, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I met his eyes. "Because you never asked. And if you had, I don't think you would have believed me." It wasn't an attack. It was just the truth. My mother murmured, "I thought those care packages you sent were your way of saying sorry." I shook my head. They weren't apologies. They were reminders that I still existed, even after I'd been erased from every family photo. I reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder. I slid it across to Erica. Inside was a printed copy of the anonymous email, the one she'd sent years ago that nearly ended my career. "I didn't keep this to incriminate you. I kept it to remind you that words, seemingly invisible, can be as deadly as bullets." No one interrupted. Then I spoke clearly, with no malice, just intent. "I don't expect acceptance, but if we're going to move forward, it starts with acknowledging the person you chose not to see." Erica stood. She walked over to me and placed her hand gently on my shoulder. No words. My father rose slowly, moved to the old family shelf, and picked up a framed photo from a long-ago summer barbecue. He stared at it for a moment. "This one's missing someone," he said. "We'll take a new one." I didn't smile. I just nodded. Not because I had forgiven them, but because I no longer needed to hold on to what hurt. A month after the conference, I returned to DC. I'd resumed my quiet routine as a part-time strategic advisor for NATO. Most of my days were spent in video briefings, analyzing simulation models, offering insight on asymmetric warfare in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. I lived alone in a modest apartment overlooking the Potomac. Still woke at 5:30. Still wrote my briefings in black ink. Still didn't return messages after 9 p.m. But one thing had changed. Once a month, I taught a special course at Fort Campbell on soft strategy in the age of non-traditional combat. Erica was always there, never missed a class. She sat in the front row, asked the most difficult questions, challenged me, even debated me, and sometimes she went quiet when I spoke about the missions that had once pitted us against each other. One afternoon, after class, she handed me a thin binder. Inside was a training reform proposal, modeled off concepts I'd introduced. "I don't need your signature," she said. "I just need to know what you think." I wrote one word on the cover: advance. Our family now existed in a quiet kind of motion. My mother sent handwritten notes each month, often just a line or two. "Are you eating enough?" she asked in her last one. My father had started telling his friends that his daughter advises high-level strategy, no longer just somewhere overseas. We didn't have a new portrait, but the next time I looked at the one on the mantle, I was in it. Not replaced, not erased. At the end of one session, a young cadet stayed behind. Nervous, maybe 23. He asked, "Ma'am, in war, what's the hardest part?" I paused, then told him the only answer that ever felt honest. Surviving without becoming a statue, not turning your wounds into weapons. That evening, I took a walk behind the training barracks. The sun was setting in gold-orange haze. Erica appeared beside me, holding a small birthday cake in a plastic container. She handed it to me with a half smile. 3 words were written on top in blue icing. General, sister, teacher. I didn't need applause. I didn't need history books to mention my name. I just needed them to look at me, not through medals or mistakes, but through the eyes that once misunderstood, and now, finally, understood. In life, some battles leave no scars on the skin, but carve canyons in the soul. We learn that strength isn't always about who speaks the loudest, but who chooses silence with dignity. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to stay when it's easier to walk away. If this story moved you, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, share what spoke to you, and don't forget to subscribe. Every voice matters, and yours is no exception. I wish I could say that moment changed everything. That after he said general, the respect stayed, the silence ended, and my family saw me for who I really was. But recognition, real recognition, isn't always applause. Sometimes it's a target. What followed wasn't validation. It was surveillance, interrogations, shadows that moved when I moved. Because someone in that room didn't just recognize me, they remembered me. From a past operation I was ordered to forget. And the moment my name hit their radar, the past I buried started clawing its way back. 1 week later, a file appeared on my desk. No sender, no briefing, just 5 words scribbled in red. You were never off duty. And suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for respect. I was fighting to survive. I'm Colleen Walsh, and what you're about to hear isn't just a story of rank or recognition. It's about betrayal, secrets buried deeper than blood, and a mission that was never supposed to see daylight. Before I begin, I want to know you're here with me. Say, listening, in the comments, or let me know where you're from. Knowing someone's on the other end of this means more than you think. And if this story finds you, if it makes you feel seen, please consider subscribing. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. The ceremony at Fort Campbell was perfect by military standards. Helicopters thundered above in formation, flags unfurled in the breeze, and the sun cast a golden hue over the polished boots and rigid salutes. I stood at the podium, accepting a commendation for my work in the Middle East, with a ribbon across my chest and the rank of Major General weighing on my shoulders. But my eyes weren't on the generals or the cameras. They searched the front row, where my parents sat with rehearsed smiles, and my sister Erica stared ahead, unreadable. My father gave me a nod, sharp, practiced. It wasn't pride, it was protocol. After the ceremony, I slipped off the white gloves and retreated to the locker room alone. In the mirror, I saw the reflection of a soldier the world applauded, but all I noticed were the hollows beneath my eyes. I sat alone for over an hour on the concrete steps of the training yard, leaning back against the wall where new recruits usually smoked or whispered about instructors. I pressed my hand against my side, tracing the scar left from Syria. A reminder of where I'd bled for a flag that still expected me to prove I belonged beneath it. No one in my family had ever asked about that wound. Despite the promotion and a new assignment as cyber defense advisor to an international agency, something inside me felt unfinished. Erica no longer sent me texts before briefings like she used to, and the last letter from my mother was more about guarding the family's image than congratulating me. I still showed up for dinner once a month. I still asked about Dad's arthritis and Erica's deployments. But our conversations stayed in the shallow end, cold, polite, as if they were hosting a dignitary, not welcoming one of their own home. A week later, at the Pentagon, I was briefed on a new high-risk cyber initiative. Global network breaches suggested foreign interference in U.S. military systems. I was chosen to lead a classified containment and counterstrike strategy. It was the kind of assignment that could put someone in a cabinet advisory seat. I accepted. Not just to serve, but because part of me still wanted to earn a nod from my father that meant belief, not burden. As I reviewed materials for the project, I came across a report from my 2017 deployment, one I knew by heart. But this version had a red mark scrawled across the margin. Mistakes that kill, who answers for them? It hadn't been there before, and no one without my clearance should have had access. Before I could look deeper, an anonymous message appeared in my secure inbox. An old name is coming back. This time, you'll fall. At home. That night, I stood alone on the training field beneath the dim floodlights. The wind tore at my uniform, tossing my hair into my face as I gripped the keys to my office so tightly the teeth bit into my palm. The same field where Erica and I once practiced hand signals in the dark. Behind me, the base's evening alarm blared, a signal drill. But in my gut, I knew it wasn't just a drill. A storm was coming. And this time, it had my name on it. I always believed enemies wore different flags, spoke in accents, hid behind lines of code or gun barrels. I never expected one would stroll right into my family's life, wearing a smile and a suit. I first heard his name from Erica, who was buzzing about a new consultant brought in for Fort Campbell's cyber infrastructure upgrade. He's from Sentinel Strategic, she said, over coffee. Cain something. Super sharp. Actually listens. The moment the name passed her lips, my spine stiffened. I ran a quick search that night. The ID was nearly flawless. Victor Cain. One letter different from the traitor I'd buried years ago. But his fingerprints, however buried, still echoed through Geneva shell companies and clean European credentials. Erica couldn't have known. Not then. Cain played his part well. Humble, wounded by a system that devours its best, as he put it. He spoke at luncheons, offered support to junior officers, and dropped just enough truth to sound believable. Erica, always aware of how she trailed behind my shadow, was drawn in fast. When I warned her to be careful, she snapped, "Not everyone gets handed spotlight, Colleen. Some of us have to find people who see us." Meanwhile, Cain reached further than I thought. My parents received an anonymous email attaching what looked like classified reports, ones that framed me as responsible for a fatal mistake during a 2017 Syria op. The subject line read, "If your daughter's a hero, why didn't 4 of her men come home?" The next week, a post hit a fringe military forum, allegedly leaked logs and operation journals with my signature. Fabricated, but convincing. One entry detailed a failed maneuver that led to 4 American deaths. Local outlets in Kentucky picked up the story. Within 48 hours, I was suspended from my international advisor role pending review. Erica didn't say a word. I walked into the base alone. My office was sealed, my nameplate gone. The few officers I passed either looked away or saluted out of obligation. One younger lieutenant gave a quiet nod, then turned his back as I walked past. I didn't blame him. At home, my father stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter so tight his knuckles went white. My mother sat at the table, holding the email printout like it was a funeral program. Her voice didn't tremble. It froze. "Is any of this true?" I said nothing. That night, I drove with no direction, ending up at the hill where Erica and I once practiced target shooting as teens. I sat on the rock we used to rest our rifles against, took off the insignia from my uniform, and laid it on the stone. The wind picked it up and carried it down the slope. I didn't chase it. I didn't need to, because for the first time, I understood. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was betrayal. They say soldiers die on the battlefield, but sometimes the first death happens when your own family turns away, and no one even has to pull the trigger. We didn't sit down to dinner. No comfort food, no music humming in the background, just a round table and a silence so taut it could have snapped a bone. The lights above us were too bright and too cold, making everything look like a debriefing gone wrong. My father's hands trembled as he folded a sheet of paper over and over. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "You need to help us understand what this is." I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, at the man who taught me discipline, who ironed my ROTC uniform before every inspection, and saw someone who didn't know what to believe anymore. I spoke softly. "You don't have to believe me, but please don't believe an anonymous email over your own daughter." Erica let out a bitter laugh and leaned forward. "You've always hidden things from us. How do I know you're not hiding this too?" I didn't reply. What could I say that wouldn't sound like spin? Later that night, another leak hit the forums. This time, it wasn't just falsified documents. It was a doctored audio file, my voice or something eerily close to it, calling the 2017 Syria op a death trap led by an idiot commander. It was edited perfectly. The cadence, the grain of my tone, even the pauses. It sounded real, and it spread like wildfire. I tried flagging it, but once it's out there, the damage is done. My inbox flooded with requests for comment. The headlines were sharpening knives. Victor Cain, I realized then, hadn't just come for me. He was orchestrating a takedown in slow motion, and he was feeding the world one bite at a time. What I didn't know at the time was that Cain had hired an elite Eastern European hacker group to infiltrate retired military databases. They'd found old backdoors, exploits from outdated systems, and turned them into front-page news. The Pentagon launched an internal inquiry, and I was immediately placed at the center of it. My name was the first listed in the classified memorandum marked urgent. I was summoned, questioned, stripped of all digital access. I handed over my government devices, one by one. When I asked if I could at least keep my encrypted notepad, the officer didn't look up, just said, "You're not cleared for classified retention anymore, ma'am." My photo disappeared from the Strategic Cyber Defense Board. My credentials were revoked. I couldn't step back onto Fort Campbell grounds, not even for briefings I'd built from the ground up. I tried calling Erica. No answer. I texted our mother, just to ask if Dad was okay. The reply came 6 hours later. One word. Quiet. The kind of message that wasn't just about tone, it was a command. Then came the collapse. News crews surrounded my parents' house. Footage of my father arguing with a cameraman went viral. A headline crawled across the screen. "Decorated General or Deep-Cover Traitor. The Walsh family under fire." The stress was too much. My father suffered a heart attack the next morning. I raced to the hospital only to find my mother standing in the hallway, arms crossed like a blockade. "You can't go in," she said. "This isn't your war anymore." I looked past her, toward the ICU doors. Machines beeped beyond the glass. My father was in there, hooked up to wires, pale, smaller than I remembered. And yet, when I stepped forward, my mother didn't budge. Her voice cut through me like a blade. "From the moment you put on that uniform, you stopped being one of us. All we have left is our name. And now, you're tearing even that apart." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked out. That night, I sat in a cheap motel room off a state highway. The AC rattled. The walls smelled like bleach and shame. I stared at the military ID they hadn't confiscated yet, its edges worn from years of use. I tapped my phone. No new messages, no voicemails, just the hollow glow of silence. Then, the screen lit up. A number I didn't recognize. Marked. Secure line. Hammond. I answered without a word. The voice was gravel, calm, with just enough edge to still sound like command. "Major General Walsh, I know you're not a traitor." A pause. "But no one else believes that now. So you're going to have to do the one thing you do best. Prove the truth yourself. Sometimes you think you're just walking through a firewall. Then you realize You are the fire they're trying to extinguish. I cut off all ties, canceled my meetings, wiped my accounts clean. I withdrew cash in untraceable chunks, packed a single bag, and disappeared to a remote cabin on the outskirts of Fort Campbell. It was old, silent, and deliberately off-grid. I left no trail, no devices, no security clearances, no favors owed. I didn't know who was compromised. I didn't know who might be listening. And more than anything, I didn't know who was left that I could trust. Every day, I sat in the dark and rewrote the 2017 Syria op from memory. I mapped out every decision, every drone angle, every radio call. I tore apart my own history with the precision of someone dissecting a crime scene, because Cain was doing the same. I just had to beat him to the truth. Then it hit me. Deep in a drive I'd backed up years ago, one no analyst ever asked to see, I found a metadata log buried beneath a mislabeled folder. One line, buried in the chaos, made my blood run cold. Drone signal rerouted due to unidentified interference. No visual feed, 7 minutes 13 seconds. Back then, we chalked it up to technical failure, Middle Eastern weather, sand interference, maybe even a software glitch. But looking at it now, in light of what Cain had built, it wasn't a bug, it was a breach. Someone had sabotaged our feed and used it to set me up. I stepped back from the screen, heart racing, hands cold. This wasn't just slander. This had been orchestrated. They started framing me back then. And now, it was time to finish what they started. I spent that night stringing thread across the walls. Old school, yes, but reliable. Operations, base locations, chain of command, contracts, and Cain. His face sat at the center like a black sun, orbited by people I once thought of as untouchable. My eyes were raw from lack of sleep, my hands ink-stained from writing more than I'd spoken in days. I pulled my military insignia from my wallet and pinned it to the wall, not for pride, but as a reminder. My oath wasn't to the army, it was to the truth. And then, around midnight, came the knock. It wasn't tentative, it was the kind of knock made by someone with rank who never expected to be denied. I grabbed my sidearm and moved silently to the door, keeping low. When I opened it, gun raised, the man didn't flinch. "Took you long enough," he said. General Hammond stood in the doorway, older, wearier, but still the same steel-eyed bastard who once promoted me with a single nod and a muttered, "Don't screw it up." I stepped aside. He entered without invitation and took in the room. String maps, handwritten notes, chaos disguised as control. After a long pause, he said, "You were right not to go public. This goes higher than anyone wants to admit." He told me what I already suspected. Cain hadn't acted alone, and there were players in the defense network who stood to gain from my fall. Names neither of us said out loud. "I've been following the breadcrumbs," Hammond said. "I couldn't act officially, but I can help. That said, if you screw this up, I won't save you a second time." I asked him for operational support, but not through the Pentagon. I needed blackout authority, off books, a clean team. He agreed. 3 aliases, no air cover, no recovery team. "If this goes south," he warned, "you were never in the system." That was fine by me. I assembled my unit the next day. Jake was the first call, brilliant coder, anti-surveillance nut, and the only man I knew who could crack encrypted noise faster than he could finish a Red Bull. Lena came next, a sniper I trusted with my life, who once pulled me out of a kill zone in Yemen with 1 shot and a broken ankle. And Marco, combat specialist, ex-CIA shadow operative, the kind of man who could walk through fire if it meant saving his team. We didn't need ceremony. We needed clarity. 1 shot, 1 mission, 1 goal. bring Cain down before he buried me for good. That night, deep in an abandoned weapons depot in Georgia, I dragged the tarp off an old mission board. Dust filled the air like ash. I wrote slowly, deliberately, with black marker on a clean white surface. Rotterdam Firebase Alpha. I stepped back, looked each of them in the eyes. He thinks I'm broken, I said, but I'm still alive, and I'm coming for him. They call me a strategist, but for me, every strategy is born out of desperation. We landed in the Netherlands under the name of a fake research firm, credentials polished, cover stories airtight. Jake handled the digital footprint, servers, paperwork, the kind of metadata sleight of hand that would fool even the most cynical customs official. Rotterdam was colder than I remembered. Maybe it wasn't the weather. Maybe it was just me, every nerve raw, every step feeling like it echoed too loudly in a city that didn't know I existed. Jake traced the source of the forged documents to a facility just outside the city. From the outside, it looked like a cutting-edge cybersecurity institute. Inside, it was a fortress, a shell company with a military-grade server tucked behind biometric locks, motion-sensitive corridors, and a skeleton crew of ex-mercs guarding it with silent precision. Cain wasn't just hiding data, he was protecting a story built to destroy me. And he'd written himself the ending. He just hadn't accounted for me rewriting it. That night, Lena and I went in to tag the perimeter. A storm rolled in, rain sweeping across the roof as we moved from shadow to shadow. She crouched to plant a thermal beacon near the west wall, something we'd use later to hack the climate sensors. But as soon as her glove touched metal, a low hum sounded. My stomach dropped. We froze. A red light flickered above us, heat signature engaged. I grabbed Lena's wrist and pulled her down. We dropped from the roof and into the thick underbrush behind a storage silo. 30 seconds later, 2 guards passed by, rifles ready, scanning with thermal lenses. We didn't move, didn't breathe. For 4 minutes, we lay in the dirt, my heartbeat loud in my ears, until they passed. Back at the hotel, soaked to the bone, Jake confirmed our worst fear. They've upgraded. 3 frequency rotations in 2 weeks. Someone knows we're coming. The data grid he displayed glowed with layered security protocols, too advanced for civilian use. This was military tech, illegally repurposed, sloppy in its audacity. Cain had grown bolder. And then, there was a knock at my door. I opened it with my sidearm drawn. Erica stood there, rain-soaked, a thin gash bleeding along her cheekbone. Her eyes were lit with fury, but beneath it, fear. "What the hell are you doing here?" I hissed. "I had to come," she said. "I saw the files on Mom's laptop. I know you're telling the truth, and I'm not going to let you walk into this alone." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, but I saw it. The guilt. The determination. She'd come because she realized too late how much damage her silence had done. I told her to leave. She refused. "I trusted the wrong people," she said, "but I need to see with my own eyes what you're fighting. Not from a screen. Not from Cain's lies. From you." I gave her one chance. Stay in the shadows. Monitor from the remote van. No weapons. No action unless I called her in. She agreed, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. We began prep. Marco mapped the layout: 2 choke points, a rear service entrance, and a central shaft leading to the main server room. Jake loaded a portable disruptor that would give us a 3-minute blackout window on the motion sensors and heat tracking. Lena cleaned her rifle, every movement precise, silent, like she was exorcising ghosts from steel. I sat on the floor alone for a moment, fingers brushing over an old photo I kept folded in my wallet, my father, standing in uniform, years before the doubt, before the disappointment. I whispered to no one. You once told me soldiers don't fight for orders. They fight for what they can't afford to lose. And tonight, I had too much to lose. The sky was ink black when we breached the perimeter. We slipped through the electrified fence using Jake's pulse jammer. Every step was rehearsed, every breath measured. The entrance was sealed with a fingerprint scanner. Jake knelt, fitted a small device over it, and within 20 seconds it blinked green. We moved fast through tight corridors, ducking under cameras, Lena covering rear angles, Marco checking corners. Finally, we reached the server room. The door hissed open, and then the lights went red. A line of text blinked across the screen in white. "Welcome back, General Walsh." A siren split the silence. Steel doors slammed shut behind us. Over the intercom, Cain's voice oozed through the speakers, calm and venomous. "Your family abandoned you, General, so tell me, what are you still fighting for?" I stared at the screen, unholstered my sidearm, and raised it to the lens above me. My voice was low, steady, cold. "I'm fighting for what you've never had. Honor. I don't believe in light anymore, but I've learned how to shape the darkness so my enemies can't hide in it." The alarm shattered the silence like a siren from hell. Red lights strobed across the facility. The steel doors slammed shut behind us, and the room buzzed with a countdown. 5 minutes. A pulsing number glowed on the mainframe, initiating self-destruct sequence. Jake was already at the console, fingers flying as he connected a flash drive, pulling raw data faster than the server could fight back. Lena took her position near the entrance, rifle up, scanning through the narrow glass slot in the steel. I shoved a metal instrument table into place as a makeshift barrier, crouching low behind it. Marco unspooled a line of tactical wire, rigging the back door latch in a desperate attempt to delay whatever was coming. On the screen beside Jake, a live feed from the internal surveillance flickered to life. 6 hostiles, armed to the teeth, moving fast down the corridor toward our location. I glanced once at the clock. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. We didn't have time. I motioned to split. Marco stayed to guard Jake. Lena held position. I ducked left out of the room, drawing fire immediately as I turned the corner. Bullets slammed into the wall behind me. I dove into the corridor, rolled behind a structural column, and drew my sidearm. When the first soldier rounded the corner, I was already moving. A slash to the neck with my knife, a shot through the second's throat, and a smoke grenade into the third wave of boots thudding down the stairs. One of them got a round off before going down. Burning heat sliced across my upper arm. I grit my teeth. There was no time to bleed. Jake's voice echoed from the room. 2 more minutes. That's when his screen lit up. Cain's face, impossibly calm, flickered into view. "I warned you," he said. "You're still pretending this matters. But it doesn't. They've all left you. Even your family. You're just noise in a war no one hears anymore." Jake muttered a curse, refusing to look up. I didn't. I faced the screen. "I don't need anyone behind me," I said. "I only need to stand on my own." Another flash on the monitor, a sniper targeting Lena's position, but this one wasn't from Cain's men. 3 rapid shots cracked the air, perfectly spaced. One after another, 3 soldiers fell. Clean hits to the head, from a distance that required more than just skill. It was instinct. It was rage. It was Erica. My radio crackled. Colleen, do you copy?" I froze. "What the hell are you doing here?" Her voice was strained, breathless, but fierce. "You still owe me that hug. I'm not dying before I get it." My throat tightened with something dangerously close to panic. "You disobeyed a direct order," I snapped. "I followed my sister," she replied. But then, the 4th shot missed. They saw her. One of them returned fire. I heard her scream, then silence. She was hit. On the roof, I saw her silhouette slump behind a ledge, the scope on her rifle tilted at a wrong angle. I bolted from the corridor and burst through the rooftop access door. One of Cain's mercs had Lena pinned. Another climbed the fire ladder toward Erica. I didn't think. I just moved. I slid across the wet concrete, raised my weapon, and dropped both assailants in 2 swift shots. I reached Lena first, pulled her back behind cover. Then I got to Erica. She was pale, bleeding from the shoulder, her skin cold and clammy. I threw her arm over my neck and half-dragged, half-carried her down the stairs while Lena covered us. Back in the server room, Jake's voice rose above the chaos. "It's done! I've got the original data!" I slammed my hand down on the EMP trigger. A high-pitched zap filled the air, and then everything stopped. The red lights, the countdown, the hum of destruction. The core was fried, but our copy was intact. But we weren't safe yet. The shutdown triggered the fallback protocol. The lights went black. Emergency lockdown mode engaged. Every path back out was now a death trap. We ran. Down stairwells that smelled of oil and ozone, through hallways still steaming from the heat of severed wires. Lena dropped 2 more pursuers who chased us blindly. Marco caught Jake mid-slip as his boot lost traction on a wet tile. I carried Erica, her head against my shoulder, whispering apologies she couldn't hear. Her blood seeped into my jacket, hot and terrifying. We made it to the ventilation shaft behind the reactor room. The explosion had already started, flames roaring from the backup power grid. Marco rigged the rappel gear. One by one, we dropped through the smoke-choked tunnel, landing hard on the pavement of the alley behind the compound. And then, one final moment. I climbed to the top of the roof to cut the last wire. As I stood there, wind slicing across my face, I turned for one last look. On the ruined wall of the command room, a screen still glowed through the smoke. Cain's words, his gospel, burned in glitching red. Family, trust, fame. I let out a bitter breath. "All wrong," I said. Then I jumped into the smoke. The house was silent. A safe house tucked into the edges of the Dutch countryside, far enough from the city to feel like exile. Night hung heavy over the fields outside. A distant ambulance siren moaned through the dark, then faded. Inside, I knelt beside the small cot where Erica lay unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. The room smelled of antiseptic, sweat, and gunpowder that still clung to my jacket. I peeled away the blood-soaked bandages from her shoulder with fingers that refused to tremble. She stirred. Then her eyes opened, pale and glassy but focused. She blinked up at me like she wasn't sure if I was real. "I trusted the wrong man," she whispered, "and I thought you'd never forgive me." I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my pack and pulled out a worn photo, creased, faded from years of being shoved between layers of gear and paper. 2 girls in cadet blues, standing straight in front of the West Point archway. She stared at it. Her lips quivered. "I forgave you," I said, "the second you pulled that trigger to save Lena." We didn't talk after that. Not really. Words felt like too much, and not enough. Instead, I unwrapped the last of the gauze, cleaned the wound again, and taped fresh strips over it. Her hand found mine and held on. When I shifted to get more supplies, the hem of my shirt lifted just enough to reveal the edge of a long scar curling down my left side. She noticed. Her eyes didn't ask, but they softened. It was the first time I let her see it. One of many, hidden, carried in silence. A quiet truce. A quiet truth. I had once been broken too. And somehow I had learned to move anyway. Her eyes filled but didn't spill. That was enough. Across the room, Jake tapped furiously at his keyboard, mumbling curses under his breath as line after line of encrypted data decoded. Then his voice cut the quiet. "Guys, we have something. We have a lot." The files he pulled from the Rotterdam facility weren't just explosive, they were radioactive. Forged documents tracked back to military-grade software used only in a secure base in Romania. $12 million funneled through shell corporations to one of Cain's dummy fronts. Names. So many names. High-level collaborators, buried under layers of aliases. But one name stopped the air in the room. A former senior Homeland Security advisor. Still active on the international intelligence circuit. I felt the cold reach into my spine again. This wasn't just a cleanup operation. This was a war they'd never admitted we were losing. I grabbed my phone and called the one person who could flip the board. "General Hammond," I said. "I have what you need, and I want what I should have had all along. An international arrest warrant, a strike team, and a chance to finish this, once and for all. To kill a predator, you don't chase it. You wait to see where it crawls to bleed." And Victor Cain, for all his masks, still needed to watch his victories unfold. He wouldn't hide in silence. He'd want to hear the applause. Using the data Jake recovered, we traced his current location, a decommissioned Cold War NATO logistics hub straddling the Austria-Slovenia border. On paper, it was abandoned, but infrared showed heat signatures, encrypted signals, and a rhythm of supply drops too regular to ignore. General Hammond met me in Brussels. He studied the satellite map, then turned to me. "This isn't just about closing Cain's operation. This is about closing the door you opened in 2017. He wasn't wrong. That mission, Operation Sentinel, was mine. And the ripple effects were still bleeding across continents. This was penance. Pentagon officials, Europol agents, and military command from Fort Campbell coordinated the final blow, Operation Valkyrie. One objective, capture Cain alive. And one rule, no more buried truths." Erica, still recovering but stubborn as hell, requested to join the command team from the central hub in Germany. "I once believed in a man who lied to everyone, including me," she said. "Now I believe in the truth. Let me help prove that still matters." But just before deployment, another twist cut deep. Lena caught a strange anomaly in the communication logs. One of our own, Lieutenant Colonel Barris, had inserted falsified reports into internal systems months ago. Cain hadn't just infiltrated from the outside, he had puppets inside the damn house. Barris was arrested on the spot. As they led him out, he turned toward me and said, "Cain isn't alone. But you are. And one day, another Erica will put a bullet in your back." I stared straight through him. "Not everyone betrays," I said. No more delays. Night fell. Operation Valkyrie began. We approached under the cover of mist and silence. Lena was in position first, sniper rifle locked at 400 meters, her breathing synced with mine over the comms. Marco led the explosives team through the lower hatchways. I took point on the central corridor. Fog rolled across the concrete. My boots didn't make a sound. The central control room glowed faintly, neon blue across cold tile. And there he was, Victor Cain, sitting like a king on a crumbling throne, swirling dark liquor in a glass. "You've lost a lot to get here," he said, "and you've killed even more." I didn't raise my gun. I laid the data transmitter down on the table between us. "And you've killed too many to pretend you're going anywhere else." He chuckled. "People believed me. Once. Just like your family believed you. You and I, we're not so different." My voice was low. Even. "We are. Because when I was betrayed, I didn't choose to lie back. I chose to tell the truth. And I brought it with me." He reached toward the console. Panic flickered in his eyes. But before he could trigger the data purge, Erica's voice burst through the speaker. "Hi, Mr. Cain. I rerouted your access codes. Nothing's being deleted tonight." His face contorted. Rage, fear, confusion. He lunged. I was faster. We collided hard, his hands reaching for my sidearm, but I'd trained for this moment. I twisted, dropped my center of gravity, locked his wrist, and slammed him into the floor. My weapon was at the base of his skull. His breath rattled. I leaned close. I fight for those who abandon me, because some of them still deserve to be protected. You fight for the echo of your own voice. That's why you lose. Outside, the sky had started to clear. As they dragged Cain out in cuffs, floodlights cut through the mist, international news outlets lit up. High-level spy network dismantled. Operation Valkyrie succeeds. I stood in the ruins of the old base. The American flag, once rusting and shredded, rose again on the central pole, and beside me, Erica stood silent, her shoulder bandaged, her face calm. I put a hand on her shoulder. That was all. No words left to say. I used to believe honor was something you wore, like a uniform, like rank. But now I know it's what stays in your hands when everything else is stripped away. A week after Operation Valkyrie, I stood at the Pentagon again. Not to testify, not to fight, just to speak. The press gathered like vultures in suits, microphones cocked like rifles. My name was everywhere, headlines from DC to Vienna. U.S. General leads international sting operation. Colleen Walsh breaks global spy ring. But for me, it wasn't about headlines. It was about facing the silence that had once swallowed my name whole. I wore full dress uniform. No stars. No insignia. Just a blank lapel and a sheet of white paper I didn't read from. I looked into the sea of cameras and said, I'm not standing here to reclaim a title. I'm standing for everyone who's ever been accused and abandoned, for those who were called liars instead of witnesses, for those whose silence was mistaken for shame. I chose not to walk away from the truth, even when it carved scars that no rank can cover. When I stepped down, the press surged forward, but stopped cold. Behind them, from the side corridor, came a sight I didn't expect. My father, Colonel Walsh, in a wheelchair, pushed by Erica. He rose, stiff, unsteady, but he stood. A reporter offered him a mic. He took it, his voice cracking. I taught my daughter never to stain the flag, he said. But I was wrong. I stained it the day I doubted the one person who swore to defend it. My mother reached for my hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Erica stood beside them, eyes downcast. You're the best thing I ever doubted, she whispered. I didn't respond. But for the first time in years, my tears didn't come from pain. They came because, finally, someone stood for me. 2 weeks later, the Pentagon hosted a formal ceremony, not just to clear my name, but to honor it. Lieutenant General. That's what they called me now. One of the few women in U.S. history to reach that rank. The medal came from General Hammond himself. His voice didn't waver. You've defended more than national security, General Walsh. You've defended the one principle this uniform is meant to protect. No one gets left behind, even when the whole world turns its back. I didn't stay long after the ceremony. I declined an invitation to join the United Nations Security Council. That kind of power never interested me. I went back to Fort Campbell instead, back to where it began, and where I was once told I didn't belong. I took a post as strategy instructor. No medals on my chest, no press, just a classroom of new cadets. And sitting in the front row, still healing but steady, was Erica. Now officially a lieutenant colonel. She didn't say, "Hi, sis." She stood and saluted. "Lieutenant General Walsh," she said, "the class is ready." I didn't bring a lecture, just one sentence. When the world stops believing in you, you don't need permission to believe in yourself. You just fight to take that belief back, inch by inch. Outside, the morning breeze stirred the flags lining the training field. The cadets stood silent, watching me. Not like I was a hero, just like someone who had made it home. I used to think returning meant someone was waiting to welcome you, but I've learned returning means walking back into the place that broke you, without flinching. Autumn at Fort Campbell paints everything gold and red. The parade field blazed with leaves, the air crisp, boots tapping concrete in rhythm. I wore my simplest uniform. No ribbons, no shine. I didn't need it. Every